African policymakers and Africans in general, African researchers should view some of these policies, these ideologies, these principles on the surface. They might look beneficial. And I feel like also for the Chinese government itself, they might not understand the true harm of what they're doing. And they might be experimenting with their own policies because they do not want to step on any toes. So they might not consider infinitely, like deep down what the kind of aid they're giving or the kind of cooperation, what implications it has on the people themselves and not on the state. It's the country. A country is not the state. It's not the government. It is the people. So I feel like policymakers should look at some of the foundations, the values on which relationships are built, and then analyze that and make a critical evaluation of those values and those principles, and then establish where you're going to go from there. You see what effect your values, your shared values are, and then you make an assessment of that, and then you change your policy according to the situation, the realistic situation on the ground. So I feel like that does put into perspective some of these dynamics.
But Patricia, I would like also to highlight the last discussion we had with you, especially on where we were noting that China or the West, there's no one who exists to train Africa how to become better. Everyone is looking out for their own interest. There's no one. China is looking out for their interest, and some of these policies they're experimenting with them, but because they are not living with the reality of the outcome of these policies in Angola, in Kenya, in DR Congo, it's not Chinese people who are experiencing the outcome of these try and error policies they have. It's people in those countries who are. And so China, as much as they are responsible, and especially when you put it into perspective that they're interfering by giving funds to people who are using these funds to oppress and to perpetuate human rights abuses in these countries. And that's interference because you're enabling them financially. Yes. But the people who are actually feeling the outcome of this effect are the people in these countries. And so as much as China and policymakers could look at that on what changes could be done on China's policies, the people on the ground who are experiencing this should be the ones feeling the pinch and reacting to it and coming up with counter policies or ways to streamline what China is experimenting in their countries. So, and that's the thing. No one exists to help Africa figure out its problems. These countries need to realize what interference is happening and put up measures to counter such things. Yes. And that's what we were saying in our last discussion, especially about financial aid. Africa themselves, they need to come up with their own strategies on how to deal with issues.
Exactly. Yeah. Because if you're looking at the next point of discussion and the drivers of China's security and aid cooperation with Africa, you're looking at because China says that now build up of its security cooperation with Africa, it says that, the African political environment is changing. So and also because it's increasing its economic interests in Africa, they're becoming bigger and bigger and much more, ingrained and much more substantial, and it's gaining more and more assets. So China keeps on saying that it will change its security dynamic, its aid and cooperation with Africa, but it's kind of like offering to solve a problem you caused, you had a hand in making. So, and even in that dynamic, you're benefiting from it, because with upping aid and cooperation, you're still tying African countries to the noose of dependency. You're giving them more money, more loans, which they have to pay back. You're giving them, training. So you're providing them with military training, or you're providing military logistics, you're putting in place personnel in these countries from the outside. So that is kind of like also invading these territories themselves to solve a problem you caused, and it ingrains power over these countries, still makes them dependent on that kind of aid. And even with cooperation, you're still seeing an imbalance of power, especially for a matter as sensitive as security and military cooperation, because the military is at the heart of a state sovereignty. Security and peace is something that it's a contract that a country's people have with their government to provide them with safety in the territory in which they call their country. As citizens, you demand that kind of security. But when you reach to a certain point where the security you're getting is not from your government, but from another government, then that kind of like puts into perspective who you're asking your sovereignty from, who you're getting your sovereignty from. It changes, and it kind of puts into perspective a lot of things. So the power reduces more and more. So I feel like there's a dynamic there that needs to be looked into. So if you're looking at problems like, we'll say, okay, there are some problems that were there before China even came, which were problems that were left by, colonialism. Colonialism just put together countries regardless of their cultural backgrounds and told them you are supposed to be in these territorial boundaries. They drew the map for us without our consent. So you have these internal tribal or terrorism or extremism. If you're looking at Nigeria with Boko Haram, if you're looking at Al-Shabaab in the Horn of Africa, if you're looking at, all these small civil wars. But then you have China there next, trying to inflate these problems, through oil in Nigeria, through, oil in the Horn of Africa, in Sudan, through, digging up minerals, through the trade in the Gulf of Aden, where you have piracy. And then you have those other small problems like poverty and economic instability that inflates some of these, internal tensions and brings up these threats, these threats that one are just building. It's like it's a web of problems that just keeps on adding to each other. When a problem arises, it's frustrated by external forces because of economic interests from the West that try to make the problems that are there even bigger. So people become poor, they are dissatisfied, they become rebels, they rebel, there's insecurity. But then China comes in and says, we're bringing in, or maybe the West comes in and says, we're bringing in military to help you settle, and then there's war and people and innocent. It's just this turmoil that benefits no one but these external parties who are there to protect their interests. They have economic interests within these countries. For them, that is what matters to them the most. So it kind of puts into perspective, and you have to think about where we stop and we unravel. And so where do we begin from? Because the people who are here, who are saying they're here to help us, they're really not here to help us. They're here to protect their own country's, interests. So you have to first analyze those things. And I feel like our governments are not in the position to do that because they also have loyalties with these same people to help keep them in power. So it has to start with a new generation of leaders, with people who are children who are looking at what has happened in the past and to analyze these things and to look at history. You have to look at the history of your countries and look at what is happening to your communities, what has happened to your people, and then learn and educate yourself and then make judgment based on that. I think that is what can help us.
Yeah. And especially when you say, sometimes you wonder when China says there will be no political interference, then they help with training the military. I mean, that concept is completely lost, or you say you're not interfere politically, then you build a parliament for one of the countries in Africa. That's right there. That's what interference means. That's right there is what not respecting the sovereignty of a country means. The minute you start training their military and then put it under the guise that we are equipping you and giving you modern equipment. But then when you look at it, you realize that they are protecting their interests. You're just using these people as puppets, but then it's the hypocrisy that goes into you writing it in your document that you have no political interference. Well, the reality of what you're doing is that you're interfering, It's quite the situation. Yeah.
Yes. I have noted but in my presentation that there are three main reasons for security aid and cooperation from China to Africa. The first one being commercial and economic reasons. So with the going out policy that started in the start of the millennium, and now the Belt and Road Initiative. So with these ones, you can see how it has developed, with the economic interests that are developing more and more strongly in Africa. And now with the Belt and Road, you see all these projects popping up all over Africa. In Kenya, you have the SGR. So you're seeing that there's going to be more military presence and more cooperation between the governments to secure protection for some of these projects, because a lot of investment has gone into them. So China needs to know that their investment is protected. So they will have trainings with the government or exchanges with the Kenyan government. You will have projects in Sudan with the oil. So you will have much more involvement from China. So they are kind of, even now with the non-interference policy, it's kind of changing. China hasn't really stuck to the completely being non-activist. So it's working up to the fact that it does need to act. They will say that they will not interfere in internal affairs, but the more they grow their power economically, the more they see the need to intervene, especially for the second reason, which is the protection of Chinese citizens working on these projects. Because you're seeing that in these situations, they hire a lot of, technical personnel and Chinese workers to work on these projects. And in some of these projects, they're in very risky areas. In the Congo, you have rebels. In Sudan, you have governments that are, volatile. You have people working in Angola, in Zambia, in mines, and you have strikes at people who are not pleased with the working conditions in these mines. And the first people they will attack are Chinese citizens. And they'll need to kind of come in and protect their own citizens. They'll say that they'll come in and protect their own citizens and their own assets. And also you have, as China advances as a global power, they become targets of terrorist attacks. And the easiest target is a citizen of your country in order to force the hand of that powerful country. So they'll up their security gain in these countries, and they'll see that they don't, they can no longer not intervene anymore. They have to intervene. They have to have their own security in these places. The policy is advancing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think in the future, we're going to see much more activism from China, especially in the security department, at least at par with the US. So you're going to see a lot more presence of Chinese military or Chinese military cooperation with African countries. And I think for this reason, the non-interventionist policy just does not work anymore. It's up to African governments to look at what they are willing to trade in exchange for whatever they are getting, and to set the ground rules and to know what the limit is. Because if you're looking at the level at which China is offering security to African countries, whether it's like we're discussing, whether it's military cooperation or military support, setting up, now they're starting to set up foreign bases in African countries for security. So you're looking at the first abroad military base in Djibouti. So that is another concept in itself. If you're having entire military setting up in another country, in another continent, outside of your own continent. If you're looking at arms cells, that is a very big thing, because China is now almost competing with European countries, with the West, in arms cells to African countries. And if you're looking at technology, military technology, which to a certain extent involves spying or digital technologies, they will say that they're cooperating with African countries to improve peace and security by improving, law enforcement and catching crime earlier through advancing technology of predicting when crime will come, through catching, these terrorist attacks earlier on. So they'll sell technology to these governments, but governments do not have laws in place that regulate this kind of technology, so it can be misused to a certain extent. So you see the kind of aid and you have to judge how you regulate it, rather than leaving China to decide what kind of aid they're going to give you, and then being happy with it. You're like, yeah, you're giving us aid, thank you, but you're not asking for it. That is, I think, the important thing to note, that these people are just offering, but you are not asking. You don't ask, they just bring it. You sign an agreement that, we'll do military cooperation, but there are no rules to determine what kind of military cooperation and to what extent do you regulate what is coming into our government. So I think that is something that needs to be considered very intently.
I agree. And I think even for BRI, that's the problem, because there are no almost boundaries of what is in BRI and not. I mean, China will come one day and just set up a wildlife tracking system for Kenya, and then they say that's part of BRI. Then you wonder, how far does BRI go? Because you see this thing, that thing is open-ended. So you wake up one day, they tell you brought military as part of BRI. You're like, how open-ended is this thing? And I think without those boundaries, and I think that's the problem. And I think that's the perspective that people need to understand, that BRI and China's approach, it's vague. There's no definition of things, but it's also working for them because it can go either way.
Yes. Because there are no rules to it. It can go either way. It's not defined. They always have an escape route because there are no rules. There's always something to hide behind because there's no definition. There's too much flexibility. And also because China is holding the power. They are the ones that are offering. They are offering that. Even if we see, they will say that African countries can leverage their own resources to a certain extent. That's not true. It's really not true. Like, the resources are nothing without, the money that follows, because these resources or the minerals or whatever that is offered to African countries, they say that it will bring development to these countries, but they are taken out of these countries in their raw forms, that there's no way they feed back into the country. Or if you're saying that we are bringing in military cooperation, there's no benefit that comes from the military cooperation after. I mean, you bring in military to settle a war or to protect your investments, but you do nothing for the aftermath. People are still poor after the war has ended. And even then, to bring them back to some semblance of development will take a long period of time, in which time China would have already exhausted its need for these resources and moved on. And China and African countries are left in the position they were left in when the Europeans left after colonialism. So it gains for there's no gain for African countries. It kind of doesn't make sense. So I think it needs to be reevaluated, and I think African countries need to start asking for more details on these agreements and for more, transparency and for more accountability and for more, because there's a lot we can get from this relationship. And it all depends on African people, not the governments, but African people themselves demanding for answers, demanding for things, asking for things, and putting pressure on their governments to demand for these things.
But then also, Patricia, it's a one-sided relationship in the sense that China has the money. Even if it's being called a cooperation, China has the money. And what China does, Africa, yes, has the resources, but what China does is, because you see, money is liquid, money can be used for a lot of things. So because they have the upper hand with the money, they are able to control the biggest portion of the relationship, Exactly. So they come with the money and they say it's a cooperation. But really, when you look at it, there's no one, a bank does not loan you money to buy a car and then they tell you I've hired a guard who will be looking at how you're driving the car. It's something that, so that now you say you built the SGR for you, then you bring us your military to look at how SGR is running. Like, at what point does that work as a relationship, of what kind, And that's when you realize at the end of the day, China is going nowhere, but I don't think they have any intention of going anywhere until they are done with whatever they are looking for in Africa. That's obvious because of how you give someone money to build an airport and then tell them you want to come guard the airport. For what reason? If it's a loan, get your money back and leave. But that's not what's happening because of that open-ended relationship where there's no stop. We can't see any stop to the point where we're like, now this is done. Thank you very much. You may leave. There's no such end. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that is really something that needs to be considered, the end for the other side. And that is something that kind of is missed out in most of these cooperation agreements that you do see, or these cooperation endeavors that China enters in with Africans. It's always China will do this. China will offer this money. China will do this. And now, like, I'll give the example of the CAC, the Forum on China and African Cooperation. If you look at the policy documents and the language that comes out of that, you always have, to a greatest extent, what China is offering. And there will be almost like a line, like one paragraph on African governments saying they accept or they concede or they are grateful for this and this. So you're never privy to what Africans are offering or what Africans are asking for. It is always what China is offering and also what China is taking. So I think what is missing from this, what can break that chain of dependability, is having an African voice in these agreements, to be clear on what African governments are getting, are asking for, and be detailed on what they're getting in return. If you're saying that you're going to offer you military aid, it has to first come, the first paragraph has to be African countries would like to approach this government for this kind of aid. And then followed by China will offer this and this. And then African governments are, they are agreeable to this. They have seen this and this happening and will offer this in exchange for this. There's no dialogue of that sort that happens in this. That's what's missing, the exchange. That's what mutual benefit is about. it's always what China assumes African governments need, but they don't understand what African people need. So I think that is the kind of like the dynamic, the understanding that is missing, because you get that kind of understanding from a deeper engagement, a grassroots engagement, something beyond what we are telling you, are giving you, and more to a conversation that is happening between people of equal standing. If you're saying we are advancing friendship or diplomacy, you look at this person as an equal partner. Someone, even if that your friend is in need, your friend, you approach this person and you're like, I have this and this, I can offer it to you. Will you accept it? And that friend will, say, yes, I accept it. Please help me. And to this extent, this is what I need. This is what my people need. And this is what I'm going to do with that, with what you're giving me. And I'm grateful for it. But I need to know what you're asking, you're demanding from me in return. So there's not that kind of exchange. There's no meaningful dialogue in China-African relations. There's always the power that the other party offering more and we're just taking, and you don't see what you're losing through the sides. You just, it has to be give and take sort of thing. Otherwise, we'll never move from that position of just always consistently taking and never, understanding what is being gained from it. Yeah. That is something that should give deeper meaning to China and Africa's relationship.
Okay, and I agree, Patricia. I would have a lot to say about that, and especially even that agreement should start by saying Africa wants China as its friend, not for China to come and tell you I come to offer my friendship. I mean, yeah, like
this is we have
use my friendship just become my friend.
$106 billion. Take it. What is all this money for? What am I going to even use it for? You don't even. It's too sketchy.